I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. In particular, welcome to Pac-12 Commissioner Larry Scott. Thanks so much for coming. And Provost Dan Bernardo, we appreciate your attendance as well. I am Kathy Clausen. I'm the Director of the Sport Management Program here at WSU, and we're pleased to offer this first annual Gordon-Enberg Speaker Series event. Just by way of introduction to that event, Dr. Mary Lou Enberg and Dr. Carol Gordon were professors here long ago in what was then the Women's Physical Education Department. Dr. Enberg coached the badminton team, I believe, and taught pedagogy and motor learning and biomechanics coursework. Dr. Carol Gordon was the chair of that department for 20 years, which is an amazing accomplishment. Nobody in their right mind, I think, would want to do that. So she also coached the field hockey and tennis teams back in the day. It's fitting that this first annual event is focused on intercollegiate athletics because Dr. Gordon was also one of the presidents of the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women, which governed women's intercollegiate athletics from 1973 to 1982 until the NCAA finally decided that it wanted to do that. And what's interesting is that the AIAW presented a different model for doing athletics. And different models, as we know from the struggles that ensued, can present challenges and difficulties when you question existing practices. So we're particularly appreciative of Commissioner Scott's willingness to entertain questions from our students in the audience about what's going on with regard to Pac-12 college athletics and maybe intercollegiate athletics in general. So with all that said, I'd like to introduce Dr. Tammy Crawford, who was the rowing co-chair for about 1,000 years at WSU, and then decided to complete her PhD, and we asked her to join our sport management faculty several years ago. And she has done a fabulous job of organizing this event. So without further ado, Dr. Crawford.
Thank you, and welcome. I just wanted to briefly tell you about how the program was going to run this afternoon. We have 275 undergraduate students in our sport management program here at WSU, and about 45 master students, graduate students, 15 of which are online students. And what we did was we gave them the charge of coming up with questions in their courses, okay? Our curriculum includes sport finance, sport econ, sport marketing, sport law, obviously sport management, organizational theory. We've got 9 different courses that our students take to allow them to become well prepared to be sport managers. So we asked each of them to come up with questions as part of their curriculum, and that's what we've got. So a lot of our students are out working the event today, as you might imagine, being sport management students. They're very involved with the football game today. We've got students working in the ticket office and IMG, marketing, working up in the press box, doing the event facility management piece of it. So of our roughly 300 students on this campus, we've got about 30 of them here in the audience today and 7 who have volunteered to ask questions. So the questions came from the students, and students will be asking the questions. Dr. Glenn Johnson has been kind enough to moderate for us. And so without further ado, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Tammy. 1,000 years of rowing coach. I didn't know it was that long. She's doing very well after 1,000 years, I can say that. It's sure great to have our Pac-12 Commissioner Larry Scott here. I'll give you a brief introduction. If I read the entire bio for him, we wouldn't have any time for student questions. So he started at this Pac-10 conference on July 1st, 2009, succeeding Tom Hansen as our 6th commissioner now of the Pac-10. Before that, he was the chairman and chief executive officer of Sony Ericsson, the Women's Tennis Association Tour, where he helped generate unprecedented growth and popularity for women's professional tennis on a global scale. He also sought equal prize money for women in the tennis Grand Slam events. He was the architect of the largest ever sponsorship for both women's sports and professional tennis, a 6-year, $88 million landmark title sponsorship agreement. So you can imagine, as soon as he had that $88 million, the Pac-10, Pac-12 now immediately said he would be a great commissioner because we need to add some teams like Colorado and Utah, and let's get a big Pac-12 network going and bring in lots of money. And obviously Commissioner Scott has done that. So with that, he graduated from Harvard. He was on the tennis team. He played professional tennis. I think just before he came over here, did a couple of matches just to make sure you were still in shape. But anyway, Larry Scott, thanks so much for being here today. And so we'll just start over here on the left with the first question, and then we'll go from there. And I think probably easier just to hold the mic, probably, and we'll just pop it off there like that.
Welcome, Commissioner Scott, and thank you for being here on behalf of NCAA Sport Fanatics everywhere. So my name is Jorge Enrique Moraga. I'm originally from LA. I'm a second-year doctoral student in the Department of Critical Culture, Gender, and Race Studies, and it's really an honor to be here. My first question really, I'm sure some of us are very interested in really trying to understand what your daily obligations are. So maybe if you could share with us what a typical week is like for you, your obligations, your responsibilities. What is that like for you?
Sure. Well, first of all, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here and especially be part of something that's a first here on campus of Dr. Crawford. Dr. Clausen, thanks very much for having me, and I wish you good luck with the program and future speaker series. So one of the great things about being in a role like this is there's a lot of diversity to what you do. No day is really the same, and sometimes depends on the time of year that we're in or particular initiatives that we have going on. And I tend to balance my time between monitoring things that are going on throughout the conference and managing what we've got going at the moment, reacting to things that you can't anticipate, that you have to react to. For example, on a Monday morning during football season, we don't know what's going to happen over the weekend, but usually we're reacting to things that happen on the field, officiating disputes, misconduct issues, other things that may have cropped up, TV issues that might arise. There's so much that's involved that's unpredictable in live sports and game day management, not just related to football, but when you think about all the other sports that we have going on. So we'll be reacting to whatever's happened and having to respond in one way or another. And then I make sure to always allocate a certain amount of my time to looking at other things beyond our conference that are happening on a national stage, or in some cases internationally, and trying to think about what's next and the future and working on the next initiatives that we're going to work on. So there's a lot of mix to what I do. We've got now really two staffs that I oversee. There's the Pac-12 conference as well as the new Pac-12 networks, which started last summer. That's a very dynamic new media company. So there's an awful lot of moving parts to what we're doing. Fortunately, I've got a great team and a great staff that manage the day-to-day, and I can pick my spots in terms of what I get involved in, depending on whether something's a high priority for me or if there's a particular issue I need to jump into. But at a high level, I'd say, managing well what we've got going, reacting to things that happen to just come up, and then looking forward nationally, globally, and in terms of the future is really, the three big buckets of my time.
You get a heads up, like on the weekend, if something happened during a game that it's going to be controversial, you get a phone call and say, Commissioner Scott, just want you to know that this is going to come down on your plate here on Monday, so you get some kind of a heads up on those.
I do. Well, first of all, I try to watch as many of the games as I can myself, so during any particular Saturday, for example, with football, I'll usually be at a game, but have a device or two with me and might be following what's going on in terms of the scores or breaking news and things like that. But we're also at the conference office utilizing technology in a very interesting way to allow me and some of the senior management at the conference to monitor what's going on, to be able to collaborate, and to be able to respond quickly if there's something that needs a quick response to. We're using a technology called Huddle, which allows video operators in our command center to real-time create a clip of any type of controversial play, which now involves targeting. As many people here know that are following football, we've got heavy emphasis on head trauma, hits to the head, targeting, which now result in immediate suspensions. So we've got a video editing staff in what we call our command center in the conference office that anytime there's a targeting call, they're immediately putting a video clip together, other controversial plays, and via email or text, there are a small group of us that will get alerted that there's a new clip available on Huddle, and through an app that I've got on my iPad and iPhone, I can go to it and immediately see several different angles of whatever play happened. So usually if there's something controversial that happens, the collaboration between our team will start real time that evening. We will then spend a lot of Sunday, analyzing it. And there's several people that'll be involved, including our head of officiating, our head of football, the deputy commissioner, myself, sometimes communications people, depending on what was going on, because we aim by relatively early in the day, Monday, to decide if there's something we have to do in terms of additional discipline or reprimands or counseling. Fines sometimes. Usually by the middle of the day Monday, we like to be in touch with the campus, if not before, to let them know what we're looking at, the type of concern we've got, flag for them what we're thinking we might do about it, and give them a chance to respond. But we're always trying to put to bed any decision we have to take about the past week in football by the end of the day Monday, so everyone can look forward to the coming week and we don't have a cloud hanging over our head based on something that happened the prior weekend. So technology has been a great facilitator in allowing us to collaborate and enact in more real time.
Some of that comes probably from the Pac-12 network, where they would monitor all these different games that you have, so you can see it that way, right? That's one way.
Yes, well, although we've set up, right now, the Pac-12 networks and the Pac-12 conference are housed in different buildings. The Pac-12 conference is in Walnut Creek, California. When we decided to start the Pac-12 networks as a media company, we wanted to be in downtown San Francisco. And so we are in different locations, but the command center is in Walnut Creek, separate and apart from the networks, and is able to utilize this technology.
Next question over here.
Hi, my name is Jim Crawford. Thank you so much. I want to reiterate what Jorge said. Thank you so much for being here. I'm sure you have a lot going on pre-game and all the time in general. So thank you for being here. I'm born and raised in Pullman, Washington, actually, a communication major with a minor in sport management. And basically, I was just wondering if you could tell us some of the challenges that you faced as a manager of a power conference in intercollegiate sports compared to some of the challenges that you might not have faced as chairman of the Women's Tennis Association.
A lot of the skills involved and requirements of being a commissioner in professional sports are not too dissimilar from college sports. I mean, at the end of the day, you've got a lot of different stakeholders that you have to manage, from the athletes themselves to coaches, and you got athletics administrators in college sports and pro sports. You had agents and tournament directors and things of that nature. The expectation that you're going to raise money, that you're going to be dealing with the media and working on the reputation and the promotion of, in this case, your league, in that case, the athletes in your tour, dealing with sponsors, dealing with television, meting out discipline when necessary, upholding the integrity and the rules and regulations. Those are some of the things in the basket. And managing people, running an effective, high-performance organization. Those are some of the skills that are really transferable, regardless of whether it's amateur sports or professional sports, when you're in the kind of role that I'm in. But the context is very different in college sports. The obvious difference of being amateur sports rather than professional sports. Big difference for me personally is adapting to it not just being one sport, where there's one unique culture and there's a group of people that We've got 20 different sports that the Pac-12 is involved in. We've got, therefore, a handful of different coaches groups, sets of rules, cultures around those sports, different challenges and opportunities each of those sports have. So the breadth and the diversity of what I deal with now, requires, excuse me, requires a different kind of agility, I guess, in terms of trying to adapt and working with other subject matter experts. In tennis, I was a subject matter expert because I was a student athlete myself, played tennis, played the professional tour for 3 years, spent 20 years in different capacities in professional tennis, so I knew that sport cold. Here, I was new to college football, basketball, all the other sports as an industry. So that's required a different type of adaptability. And the other big difference is athletics being part of a broader academic mission. And my favorite metaphor for thinking about what we do in terms of intercollegiate athletics in the Pac-12 is looking at athletics as the front porch for our universities more broadly. Athletics is the thing that garners the most attention and passion and connectivity with fan bases, prospective students, alumni. So you just really have to think about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how it fits into a broader context in intercollegiate athletics than you do in pro sports. Pro sports is pretty simple. You're focused on generating, how do I generate more money for the athletes and for the event promoters? And that's ultimately, how you're measured and how you're growing that way. That's an important component of what we do here, given the needs of our athletics department and how that athletics departments and how that ties into the needs of the universities and their academic missions. But there's a broader perspective too, and how we do certain things that reflects on the universities.
Now, you mentioned the academic component, and one of the other constituencies that you have to deal with is the college presidents, because you have meetings, a couple times a year with all the college presidents in the Pac-12?
Correct. I work for the university presidents and chancellors. That's the board of directors of the conference. We meet 3 times a year. In fact, we just met on Monday. So Dr. Floyd, who's actually chair of the Pac-12 board of directors right now for the next 2 years, deal with he and his colleagues in terms of all the major policy, financial decisions, and the strategic direction of the conference. And so they're really a strategic board that's involved. On a day-to-day basis, obviously dealing with athletics directors like Bill Moose and senior women administrators, faculty athletics reps, coaches groups, so on and so forth. So dealing with a lot of different stakeholders, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with the university presidents in college sports.
I know with Bill Moose, he's sort of like the dean of all the athletic directors because he's been around with Oregon and here.
He is very, very highly regarded.
I've heard he is, so I'm glad that's the case. Okay, our next question over here.
Right. Good evening. My name is Nicole Feline. I'm from the small town of Cedro-Woolley, Washington. I'm a graduate student in the sport management program. And tonight's question I have is, on WSU campus, we see a lot of facility construction as a result of the Pac-12 media contract. Is there any benefits to the public of the contract that they may not see?
Certainly. When I came into the role, which was 4 years ago, there was clearly a desire to increase our revenues from media, but also to increase exposure. I really looked at our priorities threefold, and when I think about what we've achieved with the media contracts, I really think about it in these 3 paradigms. First was generating more money, which was important to allow our athletics programs to do several things, to ultimately be self-sufficient and rely less on university funds than maybe they did before. The increased money has saved sports that might have otherwise been cut. I think it was a year after I came in. Some of you may remember the big news stories coming out of the Bay Area. Cal had actually made a decision to cut 5 sports, including baseball, rugby. Some legendary sports at that campus. And all of our athletics departments were struggling financially and were looking at maybe cutting sports, and they were in debt to their universities. So allowing athletics to be self-sufficient, making sure we preserve the broad-based commitment to sports sponsorship, allowing more opportunities for student athletes than might be there otherwise was essential. Having our facilities improve. We had fallen very far behind other conferences in terms of facility development, which is a really important component of recruiting. When student athletes are looking to come to a school, they are looking for what's your level of commitment to a particular sport, what's my daily existence going to be like, what kind of support am I going to have athletically, medically, academically, et cetera. And the types of coaches that we can hire. Coach Leach coming here in football was obviously facilitated by the university feeling like it could stretch maybe beyond what it had done before to be competitive. So all of those things relate to increased revenue, including the facilities that you mentioned. Another area of great importance that was one of the goals with the media contracts was making sure we get national exposure for our programs, particularly football and men's basketball being the revenue generators, the most high-profile sports. A lot of the Pac-12 games in our prior TV deal were regionalized on ABC or on Fox Sports Net. Sometimes you couldn't see them east of the Rockies. And that really hurt us in BCS standings where voters were involved, a lot of subjectivity in college sports and how the ratings and rankings work. In basketball, where there's a committee that decides which teams are going to go to the NCAA tournament. If people aren't seeing our games, we're going to get punished for that in terms of how many teams we get into the NCAA tournament. So access for student athletes, access for alumni, exposure for our programs, and how that translates into recruiting and other things, we're all related to making sure we can get exposure for our football, men's basketball in particular, more of a national platform. And then the third is thinking about Olympic sports. Football, men's basketball get a lot of the attention because they're the revenue-generating sports, have the most interest. But part of the DNA of our conference has been broad-based excellence in athletics. In addition to the academic prestige of our universities, we've won more NCAA titles than any other conference in the country, 459 NCAA titles. I think the next highest is the Big Ten, that's earned about 250. So we're really prolific when it comes to the Olympic sports, both men's and women's. We've won more women's NCAA titles than any other conference in the country. And this is something that we all know out here on the West Coast if you were part of the Pac-10 or part of the Pac-12, but generally not something that's been understood nationally. So an important objective for us with the media agreements was how we're going to get more exposure for Olympic sports, hence the creation of the Pac-12 networks, and which allowed us to be masters of our own destiny in terms of what we're going to program, what we're going to promote. So we've got, in the first year we launched the network, 550 live events. This year there'll be 750. Of those 750 live events on the network this year, only 35 of them are football games. There's another 150 men's basketball games. The rest are Olympic sports events. So I think we have 109 women's basketball games. We've got about 90 women's volleyball games this year. We have 60 women's soccer games, an equal number almost of men's soccer games, let alone cross country and tennis and golf and swimming and on and on. And this is really, that was really a huge opportunity for us to start getting some exposure for these sports and the student athletes that traditionally are the best in the country at what they do, but haven't been able to get the same exposure that athletes in other sports have gotten. And this will also help continue, when I think about what this means for the future, it really helps position the conference extraordinarily well for the future in terms of our ability to recruit and be best in class, because now when people are thinking about coming to one of our schools, and they realize if they're a great soccer player or lacrosse player or volleyball player, that they're going to be on TV quite a bit, and they'll have a chance for their families and friends wherever they are to see them play. So as I talk to our coaching groups, the inflection point here is it allows us to know we'll be able to be even more competitive nationally from a recruiting standpoint than we were before, in addition to our alumni and fans being able to follow it in a way they hadn't before. So I hope that gives you some sense of it. The benefits of the media agreements are really multifaceted. The money that comes in tends to get the most media attention. That's the most exciting part of the story. But as I travel around to our campuses every week and I see the support for really all of our programs and many student athletes that are coming as a result of the influx of money and the exposure that's coming, it's very gratifying.
It's equal distribution, too, because before it would always be the media markets like Los Angeles would get more money than, let's say, Pullman, Washington, or even Seattle. And so now it's a little bit more equal in that. I also followed the Pac-12 dictate, and I did drop direct, so I have dish only.
Can I give you a high five for that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
How is conversations going? Are they still going? Because I told them, I said, I'm getting sick and tired of you telling me you're going to have the Pac-12 network and you don't do it. And finally pulled the plug.
Yeah. Well, let me maybe comment on both those points. First of all, the equal revenue sharing, because I do want to spend a couple of minutes talking about that, because from my perspective, that is going to go down as one of the critical success factors for our conference. I came to the conference with a belief that all successful leagues have to have healthy, competitive teams from top to bottom. That's the hallmark of a successful league. and in our case, a conference. And as you mentioned, the way our media deals used to work is whatever money would come in for the football games and basketball games that we would package would not be divided equally amongst the schools. It would be divided 50% equally, but the other 50% was based on how many times you were on TV. You had a certain number of units every time you were on TV, and there would be a revenue sharing formula that flowed off of the units. So the teams that were from the large media markets, like our two LA schools, or teams that were doing particularly well, so when USC had their run in football, I mean, they were on all the time, they would get significantly more money than schools that were from smaller media markets or on TV less. So that was the first piece of why the revenue was unequal. The second piece was the conference wasn't selling all the TV rights. The conference was compiling a certain number of football games and basketball games, selling those to the national networks. But anything we didn't sell, we didn't have a Pac-12 network then. Anything we didn't sell beyond what ESPN and Fox would buy, it referred back to the schools for them to sell local packages. So given the media landscape up here now, Root Sports would have had a deal with Washington State and UW. In LA, Fox's Prime Ticket would have been sold those rights by the LA schools. In the Bay Area, Comcast Bay Area would have been sold a package by Stanford and Cal, and so on and so forth. And the teams in the bigger markets would have gotten more money than the teams in the smaller markets. So there was a significant disparity. So the two big things I would point to that really helped us do what we did was to, first of all, get all the media rights pooled in the center so that anything we were going to do media-wise would be controlled by the conference and it would benefit everyone. Secondly, moving to equal revenue sharing, from my perspective, ensured that we would have a level of health across the conference, knowing that there's other revenue streams that schools sell on their own. Ticket sales, suite sales, fundraising from donors is obviously still going to create some disparities. But as our media revenues increased dramatically, twinned with the fact that now the money that was coming in was going to be shared equally, it's created a very significant uplift and pop for the smaller market schools in the first instance. And now everyone will grow at the same level. It's really hard to overstate what the impact of that has already been. And I get excited thinking about where we'll be 5 years from now. But this year, if you listen to the national media talking about football and now basketball, they're talking about the depth of the Pac-12 conference in a way they certainly did when I arrived. In fact, when I arrived and I was talking to people about this job, and what do you think about the Pac-10 commissioner role? These were friends in the sports industry and media industry in New York. They would say, great opportunity, great schools, but in football, it's really USC and 9 others. That was the national reputation of the conference. Over the last couple of years, as Stanford and Oregon have done very well, made it to BCS bowls regularly, there would still be some narrative around, okay, well, the conference got a few elite teams, but it's not the SEC. There's the SEC, and then we'd get talked about in the same context as the Big 12, Big 10, ACC, et cetera. Well, there's definitely been a sea change going on, and this year you've really noticed people talking about the Pac-12 right there with the SEC in terms of depth, and we are in the conversation about who's the best conference and who's the strongest conference in football. And from my perspective, this isn't because Oregon's number 2 right now and Stanford's number 5. They were in these positions last year and the year before. It's because there is a respect for the quality and the depth, and seeing what Coach Leach has done with this team and how they played at Auburn away, and then you go and see what Auburn's done in the SEC since then and the rest of the SEC. Notable wins by UCLA over Nebraska away, Arizona State beating Wisconsin at home. Our non-conference performance has really opened some eyes, and it's showing up in the number of teams that we've got ranked every year, and just this national respect. So that's been the big difference, in my view, that is starting to happen as a result of more resources, better coaches, better facilities. And again, I see it just starting to happen. It's really fun to think about where we'll be the next few years when this keeps ramping up and kicking. I think we're on incredibly solid footing. me shift back to the DirecTV question, because a great source of frustration for a lot of our fans, certainly it is from me, get asked about it everywhere I go. In fact, normally when I meet someone now at a game, it's what's happening with DirecTV, and then it's nice to meet you, and they introduce themselves. So it's definitely top of mind for all of our fans, and I get it. When we decided to start the TV network and do it ourselves, we very much went into it with our eyes wide open after doing a lot of due diligence and research. So we looked at other sports networks that started, like the Big Ten Network, the NFL Network, Major League Baseball, and all those examples are examples where they got important distribution from the beginning, but didn't get everyone. And they wound up getting involved in distribution battles, fights, negotiations to try to claw that additional distribution till they got to full distribution. And so we understood when we went into it that we'd face some challenges on distribution because these networks, the distributors don't like new networks starting. It just increases their cost, their bandwidth, creates more fragmentation in the market. They'd prefer a world where there's only a few programmers out there. So we knew we'd have some battles, didn't know where we'd have them. We decided to start the network only after we had the major cable operators, Comcast, Time Warner, and Cox. So we knew we'd start with major distribution and cable across the country, and then the rest we'd have to negotiate for, fight for. So as I sit here today, and it's only the second year of the network, and I always try to remind myself of that, we've got 50 different distributors, in addition to the major cable operators, Dish, so one of the two satellite companies, and we recently signed a deal with AT&T Uverse, one of the two telco companies with Verizon. So judging by other historical launches of sports networks, we're doing very well, and we're on track. But DirecTV is the biggest in the country, so until we have them, this is going to be a source of frustration. And I think it could take a while now that we've established the value of the network. We've got over 50 that are paying to have it. Certainly got a responsibility of the schools to make sure the network is run responsibly, is not a cost drain for the schools. Moreover, should generate revenue for them down the road. It's important that DirecTV or anyone that's not taking it currently take it on the same terms as everyone else. So we're in a bit of a holding pattern. There's no optimism on the horizon, unfortunately, but I'm very confident that over time, with the quality of what we have on the network, the quantity of games we have, the passion of our fan base, that we will be fully distributed at some point.
Very good. Another question over here.
Good afternoon, Commissioner Scott. My name is Greg Mager, and I'm here representing the online graduate students that Professor Crawford was speaking about earlier. I'm the athletic director and PE teacher at Upper Columbia Academy, a small boarding school outside of Spokane, Washington, and the proud father of 2 little girls. My question was actually about revenue sharing. You touched on it briefly. A couple follow-ups for you. How are postseason revenue distributed? And if a school is within NCAA sanctions, are they part of the revenue sharing as well?
Great questions. So the philosophy of equal revenue sharing applies across postseason revenues as well, both in football and basketball. We do reimburse schools for their costs of travel. So if you're participating in the NCAA basketball tournament or a bowl game, you do get expenses reimbursed for going to those games. The net after those expenses are reimbursed are distributed equally amongst all schools. And up till now, we've never had a situation where if a school has been suspended for whatever reason, they've still enjoyed their share of the revenues. We've not withheld that.
My name's Jordan Profit. I'm from Sumner, Washington, and I'm a graduate student in the sports management program. So you already kind of touched on this, but going a little bit deeper, in the light of recent concussion developments and the increased potential of chronic secondary pathologies developing, what does the conference have planned to increase awareness and safety in our Pac-12 athletes?
So it's an area of great concern, and there's a lot that's still unknown. It feels in an important way that we really are actually just at the beginning of discovering, what the impacts of head trauma are generally, and what can be done to mitigate or prevent it. We are really at the beginning as a conference of getting organized ourselves in terms of how we're going to study what's happened there and try to make a contribution to the national discussion about head trauma and preventative measures. We're fortunate in our conference that we've got some of the leading medical research institutions in the country. I mean, really, we're doing outstanding stuff in terms of sports and sports medicine and head trauma more broadly, which obviously, goes beyond sports. The military is keenly interested in this, and others. And a lot of our schools have embarked on different studies in this area. So we went through a process over the last 18 months where we said, well, is this an area that's really just best left to the schools to deal with individually, and their research institutions is what they do, or is there a role for the conference to play? And this is a good example of the type of thing that we would discuss with our board of directors, university presidents and chancellors, an important strategic decision in terms of what do you do as a conference, what areas do you decide to get involved in. And the feedback I got was terrific and very, very clear that as universities, we're in the business of building brains, and not just intelligence, but looking after health and well-being of our students, and that should go to student athletes. And if there are risk factors, or there are physical and other threats to student athletes, we have to be engaged and should be engaged as a conference to look at that. So we decided to do a few things in response to that. We decided to create a head trauma task force across the conference and to create a steering committee that will aim to coordinate research across our campuses that's happening to try to have a higher impact, to look at some of the individual research initiatives that are going on, collaborate, communicate, and see if there's some more things that we could do jointly, and to support that with financial resources. So we got approved a $3.5 million commitment coming out of the new college football playoff money that's coming into the conference. There's going to be some increased funds that are coming to our conference as a result of moving from the BCS to the college football playoff starting next year. And we got that amount of money dedicated to this initiative. So that's for next academic year. But what we're in the process of doing now is forming the steering committee, establishing what its goals will be, putting together an RFP process, and we're going to be working with our campuses to try to identify areas of research that allow us to track better head trauma and figure out from that, are there rules changes, are there other preventative measures that we can take, other things our doctors, athletics trainers can do to create a more safe environment for competing in intercollegiate athletics. So that's one whole category of things that we're working on right now. The first question, how do I spend my time? So, that's something I'm, now spending some time on with our team. How do we organize that effort, and how do we get it launched? The other thing we did in football is decided, and I should say before I talk about football, that head trauma in sports is an issue well beyond football. I saw something, I think, this morning or yesterday. I'm regularly, reading reports and media about this. I think sports like field hockey, soccer regularly rank higher than football in terms of number of concussive incidents. Football, of course, gets the attention. It's on TV all the time, and this slow motion replay, showing us all these big hits and the effect on student athletes. But in football, we are at the forefront as conferences in trying to create a more safe environment for the student athletes. We passed rules limiting the amount of contact in practice, limiting the number of days you can have full contact beyond what the NCAA permits. I think that will result in other conferences following the protocol that we've established, and we're regularly looking at other rules that we might implement to create a more safe environment. But of course, it's a very delicate balancing act. You want to be mindful of the nature of a particular sport. We've got a lot of sports where there is contact and there's no avoiding it. And, we're not at the point where people are talking about taking headers out of the sport of soccer, or we're taking away kickoffs or tackling out of football. So I don't think there is easy answers. It's a balancing act. There's going to be transformation over time. But I'd like for our conference to remain at the forefront of this from a research perspective and from a rules-making perspective, and just overall focus on student-athlete welfare.
One of the other jobs you have, do you ever have the equipment manufacturers come by and say, Commissioner Scott, this is the helmet that all the football teams should have, and here's the reason why? You have to go through, you see that too?
We do. We do. We've got a great group of equipment managers in our conference, and they're organized. They meet regularly, and the folks that oversee our football operations, would immediately pass that on to the schools, and they're always testing new equipment. We're even working on plans to put microchips in shoulder pads and helmets to measure some of the impact and things like this. So there's a lot of technologies, a lot of investment going on in this area, and we're right in the middle of it.
Okay, next question over here.
Hello, my name is Caitlin Clinton. I'm an undergraduate in sports management, and I'm from a small town called Bickleton, Washington. And my question for you is, excluding football out of the equation, how do men's and women's sport compare in generating revenue?
Well, they don't compare in generating revenue right now is the quick answer. There are really only two sports that across the board in our conference and nationally tend to generate positive revenue. That's football and men's basketball. If I think about our conference, there are other sports on a campus-by-campus basis that might have a real niche, and they might do well. They might generate more revenue than it costs them to operate the program, but there's no other sport that I could point to across the board where that's the case. So some of our schools, it might be volleyball or women's softball, or baseball is popular at some of our campuses. Women's gymnastics at the University of Utah has a niche there where it's really popular, and people pay to go and they generate income. But that really is the case across the board. Another measure of that is at the NCAA level, the national level, where they run the postseason national championships. I think there are only 5 or 6 championships that make money. There's, of course, football, and the NCAA controls the FCS championships. There's the NCAA basketball tournament, which is off the charts, successful financially. There's the wrestling championship, the men's lacrosse championship, sometimes makes money, and I think there's one other. Aside from that, everything else loses money, or let's call it an investment, including women's basketball and including volleyball. So unfortunately, there is no women's sport that is profitable, if you want to look at it that way, which is something near and dear to my heart, having spent 6 years running the women's professional tennis tour, which was very profitable, and fought hard to get it treated equally in terms of compensation for the athletes with the men, as you were nice to point out in the preamble. So it's something I'm keen to try to work on within our conference and nationally to try to elevate some of the women's sports. But because of Title IX and because of the commitment of conferences like ours, women's sports has tremendous opportunity. There's equal opportunity from participation level. I know on our TV network, Pac-12 Network, there are an equal number of women's sports telecasts as there are men's sports telecasts. There are an equal number of NCAA championships for women's sports than men's sports. But the fan base just isn't the same right now.
Do you sort of monitor how the pro sports are doing, like in soccer or things like that, and how long it takes for that to finally reflect in the college circles? I'm thinking of some of my students now, they're talking more about soccer today than they ever did 10 years ago. And you tend to think that might translate eventually here to make soccer a profitable sport eventually.
I think, we do. We monitor and very much monitor grassroots participation, which tends to track sports like soccer. And I'd say lacrosse nationally is one of the fastest growing. So our conference is very much monitoring lacrosse. Sand volleyball, beach volleyball is a sport that, because of, I think, the exposure through the Olympics and their pro league, has gained some interest. And I think we've got 6 or 7 schools that have signed up and are going to be starting beach volleyball programs. So there definitely is a correlation.
We do have sand volleyball here at the Student Rec Center. It's real tough in February and January, however, just to find the sand. You know. Okay, next question over here.
Hi there, my name is Matthew Zimmer, and I'm a communication major and a sport management minor. My question is a two-part question. So one of the hot topics in college sports for fans and the student athletes themselves is the thought of practicing amateurism. So the two questions were, what steps are being taken at the conference level to either support or negate the idea of amateurism in practice? And what do you see happening in the future regarding the issue of compensation for amateur athletes in college athletics?
Yeah, I think for those, I mean, there's a lot of debate in the media about amateurism, are student athletes being exploited, should they be paid? In fact, it was remarkable, it was about a month ago, a little bit more, front cover story, Time magazine, should college athletes be paid? So it's very much become part of the dialogue nationally. But for those that work in collegiate sports, there's a deep level of commitment to the collegiate model and amateurism. I mean, from the perch that I see it from, we've got 7,000 student athletes in the Pac-12 that are enjoying an incredible experience and opportunity to participate in intercollegiate athletics as part of their overall education. Many, of course, are getting their education paid for and scholarship and all that. So I think there's a deep commitment to maintain the model and be able to support many student athletes and not have being a collegiate athlete be a career or something that you're paid for. Having said that, there's obviously this is an issue that gets as much attention, if anything. So at the conference level, we obviously do a lot to support a lot of the programs that aren't getting a lot of that media attention, and we try to celebrate the student in student athlete through various awards that recognize leadership, academic achievement, community service, in addition to the stats that you might put up, and obviously recognize Olympic sport athletes, not just the student athletes that are getting the media attention through football or in some cases men's basketball. As I mentioned, that was one of the fundamental gating principles of the TV network. How are we going to give more exposure for these sports that aren't getting a lot of attention? So there's a lot that we do on that side. And more, because we are really sensitive to the topic that you raised, on the TV network, if you watch it, really trying to peel back the curtain and show what the life of the student athlete is like, that it's not just about what happens on Saturdays or game day with all the media attention, the glitz and glamour and the big fans, but what's life like going to classes, at practice, trying to juggle and balance the life. So we are trying to give some exposure and recognition and celebrate the student and student athlete. What I see is going to happen, conferences like ours that have a lot of resources coming in would definitely like to provide more support for student athletes and are often frustrated and held back because of the way the NCAA governance system works. Basically, every level of Division I has to agree to institute a new policy. So we want to provide more support and redo some of the scholarship rules, which haven't changed in any significant ways since the 1970s. So in addition to room, board, books, tuition, trying to cover the full cost of attendance through a stipend or something like that, because I think we are mindful that the rigors of being a student athlete in most sports have also changed over the years, and these can be 12-month engagements, not just seasonal, and student athletes might not have a chance to work the same way that other students can, and some things of that nature. So I think we'd like to provide more support financially, but not cross the line of paying salaries or on top of that. And I think that'll happen.
Just thinking of the basketball schedule now, we have games on Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday and Sunday. And so the student athletes can be quite busy. One of the things that came up recently that I hadn't seen happen in a long time in sports, and this happened at Grambling, where the student athletes just basically went on strike. They said, we're not playing. Is the Pac-12, how does the Pac-12, I know you sit back and watch it and you say, thank goodness that isn't our conference, but that's got to shake up a few conferences around here too when students do that.
Oh, certainly, yeah. Schools like ours are very different in terms of the resource. I can't say I'm perfectly aware of everything that happened in that situation, but it seemed like there was almost a revolt over coaching changes and the way they were being treated. Student athletes that go to our schools are very fortunate. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of infrastructure. A lot of people looking after student athlete health and welfare. Great coaching staffs, deep benches, and all that. So I can't imagine one of our schools would ever find themselves in a situation like Grambling was. But that's a good example where there's just a wide variety of types of schools under the NCAA umbrella with different types of resources. And so many of the policies have been established on the basis of a level playing field. And one size has to fit all. And the notion that there's a competitive advantage if a school can provide more staff support or other support for student athletes than other lower resource schools. And that's the culture change and the philosophy change that I'm advocating for and other commissioners are advocating for, that just to recognize in this day and age, there is a competitive disadvantage in terms of the resources schools have, and it shows up in facilities and the caliber of coaching, the quality of education someone can get in many different ways. We have to be mindful that people play by the same recruiting rules, same rules of the game, but beyond that, we shouldn't try to overly legislate, and schools that have more resources ought to be allowed to do a better job supporting student athletes.
Okay, question over here.
You alluded to the fact that the Pac-12 network was a fairly successful launch, and we have the Pac-12 Now app on iPad and the iPhone, tablets and things. I was wondering if you could give us any ideas about ideas you have for more second screen experience on tablets and iPhones in relation to the network and things like that.
Yeah, it's a really fun area to think about. So in that bucket of my time that we talked about before, where we're trying to think about what next in the future, I'm really intrigued by what's happening as a result of technology and how that is going to enable and change the fan experience and how fans like to consume sports, and how we make sure our conference that is rooted here on the West Coast with so much innovation that comes out of the West, so many of our alumni involved in tech companies and the media industry. We've got access to great resources to think about those questions and how we are at the forefront of those developments. So we were the first TV network ever, I think, that on the day of their launch of the linear network, also launched TV everywhere, so that a fan could watch on their phone or their iPad the same TV signal they were seeing on their television. Usually networks launch and then they kind of catch up to this technology. Even the recent launch of Fox Sports 1, you think of all the resources of News Corp and Fox, and I think there was about a month or 2 month lag time between launching their linear network and having their TV Everywhere apps allow you to do the same. So I like to think that that type of technological innovation, a mobile strategy is embedded in our DNA, and we know our fans are very technologically savvy, want to be able to utilize everything that you can utilize. So our efforts on that side are regular and they're active. I regularly meet as I travel around the country with other leagues or technology companies that are pioneering developments in this space. So is our digital team at the Pac-12 Networks. And the initial area of our focus has been making TV Everywhere work, having a robust offerings in the way of scores, stats, and other more bite-size video, on-demand video that supplements the live streaming. We are looking to live stream more events than what you see on the linear network, and those have been sort of the first wave in our first year of operation of initiative. As we think about the future, we are thinking about the game day experience in its totality, both for fans that go to the stadium to watch the game, and in terms of what it's like at home, knowing that most fans have more than one device open while they're watching the TV. There is a huge social aspect of watching a sporting event. That's one of the great things about going to a game. You're with your friends, you're tailgating, you're seeing other people, you're collectively experiencing something that's really cool that ties you together. But with all the advent, in social media, with Facebook and Foursquare and Twitter and all the great technologies out there, the idea of being social and experiencing something together has now gone beyond physical, and you can do it digitally. So how we play in that space, obviously there are social networks that allow fans that are watching on TV and across the country from each other can still experience something together through the social networks that exist. How we fit into that ecosystem and provide products and services through Pac-12 that help augment that and facilitate that, we're still playing around with. Let me give you an example, though. We are recently experimenting with a new technology company in the Bay Area called Snappy TV. Snappy TV allows you on your phone, if you want to see a replay of a play that you just saw, you can control it, and you can do that on your device. So I think that's a good example of a first step that we're taking to enrich that second screen experience. When you're watching television, you are reliant on what the director decides to give you. It's a passive experience, or as people like to call it, it's a lean back experience. You're going to take in whatever the TV's offering to you. I think about second screen experiences. What are those lean in opportunities that are interactive, allow you to engage, allow you as a viewer or as a fan to decide what you want when you want it, and to facilitate you calling up, whether it's statistics or instant replay or a different TV angle, or you want to buy the shoes that you see someone wearing in a basketball game. That's the area where I think we can probably add some value over time in terms of the second screen experience. And what I have been talking about publicly is in terms of the stadium experience with our new deal with AT&T. Actually, we've got a meeting next week with them in San Francisco area. How do we take the amazing content that we've got through Pac-12 networks, all the things you can watch at home, and make it accessible in the stadium? And a lot of that starts with working on the connectivity and bandwidth challenges we have in all our facilities. I've made the analogy, I think, if in this day and age, as attached as everyone is to their device and being connected. If you go into a football stadium, a game day or a basketball game, and all of a sudden you can't make a phone call or a text, you feel like your oxygen's cut off. If you can't post a picture of you at that game or experience, if you can't be engaging in social networks, if you can't call up video, all of a sudden the level of your experience has gone way down from what it's like at home, and I don't think we can allow that to happen. So very high priority for me in terms of technology and this is not easy to do and it's not inexpensive, but how do we create more robust Wi-Fi and high density wireless at our facilities, and then take all the amazing content and technological innovation coming out of Pac-12 networks and offer it to fans in the stadium. I think this is really the holy grail for us over the next 5 years as a conference, that we can really be on the forefront of that.
Of course, today in the press box, you'll see the 3D TV that one of our professors here has come up with, and does a great job on that. How far away are we from having a 24/7 Pac-12 network? Because when I tune over there, it's only when the games are on, or what are we going to ever have something from the studio, sort of a quasi-ESPN?
Yeah, I think even ESPN probably doesn't have fresh programming in a pure 24/7.
Yeah, they repeat.
So I think we'll, for the foreseeable future, we'll probably repeat while most people are sleeping. But I definitely see over the next few years, you will see not just more events. We started at 550 or at 750 live events this year. Next year, we're going to go to 850 live events. There'll be more live events. With that, you'll see more studio shows, pre-game, post-game, halftime. augmented on digital as well, and you're getting more short form programming, campus content, showing the life, beyond just what happens on the playing field, and some interesting feature shows. For those of you that are watching the network, an example of that was a new show that we created this year called The Drive. For those that remember what the NFL experimented with a few years ago called Hard Knocks, that really gave you behind the scenes 24/7 access to the New York Jets, and then they did it with some other programs as well. We've started that this year with Arizona State and with Cal. Their coaches raised their hand and said, sign me up. We're happy to open the doors and show everyone. So there's a weekly half-hour show showing what the life in one of these programs is like, and it's gotten great critical reviews. So I think you'll continuously to see us ramp up the programming generally. But also keep in mind we've got 7 networks. We've got a national network and then 6 regional networks. So increasing the programming will also mean more tailored programming relevant to local fan bases. So Pac-12 Washington will have more and more programming focused on the Cougars and the Huskies and what's relevant to their fan base, their sports as well. That's the beauty and why I'm so delighted we've got this unique structure of the 6 regional networks as well as national networks. It allows us to super serve our local fan bases by offering them content they care most about.
When you mention the feature shows, I'm thinking here of that video that you get to see on Monday morning where everyone's isolated. These are some questionable things that happen. A whole feature that you make the call and let the viewers, not necessarily on Monday, you have to make your decisions, but a little bit later that we see if we can make the call too.
It already feels like that, believe me.
Question from over here.
So you mentioned in passing some of the contributions, some of the positive factors that have occurred since the Pac-10. When the conference was considering expansion, what were some of the parameters that were being discussed? Who was involved in the decision-making process, and what was your active role in making that happen?
So, as the commissioner, CEO essentially of the conference, really up to me to bring strategies and concepts like that to the stakeholders and then ultimately to the board, which are the presidents and chancellors. So in the case of expansion, I determined pretty early on in my tenure, which started in the summer of 2009, that if we were going to maximize our opportunity from a media perspective, from a revenue perspective, and really be seen as on par with the other major conferences out there, we would benefit if we were to expand. And in the first instance, thought it made sense to go to 12 schools like the SEC was at, the ACC, Big 12 was at. And we're looking at opportunities there, and as part of that process, very much talked to our different stakeholder groups, athletics directors, faculty, senior women administrators, about what criteria we should be, and ultimately got steer from our presidents and chancellors about the criteria. Academic compatibility was important. The fact that in our conference, all of our schools are high research institutions is a source of pride and compatibility in terms of the values and the priorities that our schools have. Geographic proximity, and making sure the costs and the logistics involved in athletics competition between our schools made sense. And then it was really, those were some of the gating issues. And then it was really left to me to determine what would add value and is it worth it? Because there are also some trade-offs and some things you give up by going from 10 to 12. Our schools, when we were the Pac-10, enjoyed knowing you would play every other school round robin every year in football. In basketball, we had double round robin, and at the beginning of the season, you were going to play every other school in the Pac-10 twice that season. One of the trade-offs in going to 12 is you don't play everyone every year in football. We have a north-south. In basketball, you don't play everyone twice. There's a rotation. And you can imagine, if you've got schedules for 20 different sports, the flow-on effects and impacts. So it was really up to me to demonstrate, if there was a value involved in doing this and bring specific recommendations, to have discussions or negotiations with possible schools. And pretty early on, Colorado and Utah were obvious choices. In fact, back in the 90s, there was some discussion about expansion. They were always there because when you look at the Western United States, the academic rankings of these schools and premier schools in other states that would add value geographically, those were obvious choices. While we were going through that process, it was clear other conferences were thinking about going beyond 12, and we got sidetracked for a while and thinking about 16. And we're talking to Texas and Texas A&M and Oklahoma and other schools, and that would have been, a very different value proposition completely. To include the state of Texas and its premier schools and other schools there would have brought very different kinds of challenges, but bigger opportunities in a certain respect. And it didn't make sense at the end of the day as we vetted it, and it didn't happen. But Colorado and Utah have just turned out to be a great fit. And ultimately, once I negotiated the deals and how it would work with those schools, brought it to the presidents that had to sign off on it.
Do you envision a day of a Pac-14? I know you don't want Pac-13, but a Pac-14 or 15 is.
I don't
pretty
see
well
it.
feel a full house right now.
Yeah, I do not see that happening in the short term. You can't really predict where you might be 10 years from now, but in the short term, it's not something we're spending any time thinking about, and I don't see it happening. We're delighted with what we have with 12, where we are competitively with all the other conferences, how it's worked in terms of the harmony in the conference and the cultural fit, Colorado and Utah with the rest of our schools, and there's no clear upside right now.
You've been quite a visionary in terms of when you took over the Pac-12. The big announcement came out of New York. You went back to the East Coast and said, hey, we're from the West Coast. You need to know about the Pac-12. And that was quite a marketing statement. And also you've moved things to Las Vegas, too. So you might give us some of the reasons behind that.
Yeah, well, when I think about the aspirations of the Pac-12, it's very much national, if not global, in some cases. And I think there was a lot of focus when I started about there being an East Coast media bias. And do we get our fair share of the attention? Do we get the respect that we deserve? Knowing there are certain things that are just facts. I mean, there is a heavy media concentration on the East Coast, and no surprise, a lot of the pundits come from East Coast schools. And those are the networks that they're tied into. So that has been a challenge for our conference. Time zones, and there's nothing you can really do about that. Our games can't start as early, East Coast time, as other conferences, and they're going to finish later than other conferences. So there's no getting around that. So what I've tried to think about are creative strategies to mitigate some of those factors that you can't change, and to be maybe more proactive, creative in terms of how we have our presence be felt on the East Coast. So some of the ways we've gone about that is being insistent that in new deals that we have with ESPN and Fox, that every game they put on are fully nationally distributed, no regionalization. And that ensures that every game is seen on the East Coast. Taking our football coaches to the East Coast for a bi-coastal media day rather than just a media day on the West Coast. So we still serve our West Coast media. We still do a leg of it in LA. But the last few years, most of the years, we start in Bristol, Connecticut at ESPN's headquarters and do what they call the car wash and go visit everyone and allow our coaches to develop relationships with the media. And we were the first conference to do it en masse, and now every conference is doing it every year. So now we have to do it every year. But as you pointed out, when we decided to unveil the new Pac-12, we actually did it in Times Square with a lot of our media partners, and it was a recognition that we're a national brand, we're relevant nationally. A lot of the media is on the East Coast, so from time to time, if we're going to unveil some new news, we ought to do it on the East Coast as well as back here. And I think you're right. I think there was an impact to what we did from media coverage standpoint, but what I was aiming for as much as anything was the statement that it made, that this isn't the way the conference used to think. I mean, this is a new way of thinking. This is going to be a leaning in type of conference. We're going to be aggressive. We've got a big vision for how we think about ourselves, and we plan to compete.
In Las Vegas, you did big show place. So
yeah, that was mostly about how are we going to have the kind of environment for our event, the kinds of crowds, the kind of atmosphere that the event deserves. We had been in LA for 10 years, and we're frankly struggling, with getting crowds there. And if you went to the event, there wasn't a lot of energy. There wasn't a lot of noise. And that not only affected how you felt as a spectator there, but if you turn on the TV and you're watching the games and you listen to the way the commentators are commenting, it feels like, okay, well, this can't be that important if they can't even fill the stands. So of paramount importance to me as we looked for a new location is what would be most appealing to our fans to attend. And after doing a lot of due diligence, became pretty clear that Las Vegas is a favorite place to go to. It can be inexpensive to get there. You can kind of do Las Vegas at very different budget levels, and fans that go know that they're going to have a great time, and it's going to be entertaining regardless of how their team does. In addition, we found a great venue. There was 11,000 seats rather than 8,000 seats, MGM Grand, and where all the famous boxing matches are. And it wound up being a great venue for basketball. It was loud, it was intimate, the stands were full, and it wound up being a big hit. And I think through word of mouth, this is going to become one of the must-see events, something, I think fans are going to just start circling with groups of friends to attend every year. It really turned out to be a big hit.
I know you've got a meeting coming up, so we'll have one last question here from this side here, and then we'll call our quits for the day.
In reference to men's college basketball and the one-and-done rule, wondering your thoughts on the one-and-done rule, and is it a good thing for college men's athletics, or I've seen some coaches come out and say they'd like to see 2 years and done. What are your thoughts on the one-and-done rule?
Yeah, I don't like the one-and-done rule at all. I think it really runs counter to, I think, what we ought to stand for in terms of student athletes being fully participating as students at the schools and at least giving a chance for student athletes to get an education. Having said that, if students are in school and they decide they want to turn pro at an appropriate time, or frankly, my own personal perspective is if a 17 or 18-year-old doesn't want to go to college in the first place and wants to turn pro, and they ought to be allowed to. And in basketball, if they want to go play in the NBA's D League or go over and play in Europe or China, I certainly don't think we should force young men or women to have to go to college if they don't want to go to college. Having said that, if they decide to go to college, if they take a scholarship, if they take a spot away from other deserving student athletes, I do feel that there should be a minimal level of commitment in a way that then is not really disruptive, and they should be there for a certain number of years. I think that approach works well in football, approach works well in baseball, where if student athletes are going to college, they're there for a certain number of years before they were thinking about leaving. I think it would be a lot healthier for the student athletes that are playing basketball. I think it would be much better for the whole ecosystem of college sports. I think it would be more fair at a lot of levels and better for those individuals.
Well, let's have a nice hand for Pac-12 Commissioner Larry Scott. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today, for being so open to answer all the questions. And now that we know that Elson Floyd is the chair of your Pac-12, now I know why you have to be there at 5:30 to be at his president's box.
Can't be late for that one.
All right. Thank you so much.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
I have a little presentation for you, if I can steal your microphone.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, I don't know who might be our second series speaker, but boy, is the bar been set high, and do they have big shoes to fill. So, Dr. Glenn Johnson, I would like to give you a little Sport Management Club sweatshirt. Thank you very much, and a little vino for later to celebrate. Thank you. No, that's yours. That's yours too. And Commissioner Scott, you can't go home without a little Cougar Gold cheese and a bottle of Cougar wine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great.
And boy, another great round of applause. I think that he's done a terrific job and was very articulate. Thank you.